Talking about Robert Boland, who's a sports lawyer and professor at Ohio University. Robert, thanks for joining us again this morning.
Tiki, always a pleasure to be with you. Thanks.
Now,
Happy to be here.
I'm interested what your thoughts are on, one, the Berman decision, and then two, how he approached it. Obviously, he didn't talk about guilt at all. It was all about the process, and it came down to a question of fairness. Does the NFL have a leg to stand on when it's interpreted as unfair?
I think Berman's decision becomes more difficult to overturn on appeal now because he looks so much at failures in the process. Now, historically, you can look at an arbitration decision, and they don't need to be fair. They just need to be clean, if you were to think about it that way. Perfect arbitration decisions, not so much. But if there's a clean process, you're okay. Here, he makes findings of the fact that the NFL messed up the process so badly along the way that it was unrecognizable and unfair. So I think it's a very tough job for him to overturn. And here's the one thing that maybe didn't surprise me, but it certainly he gave the NFL ample opportunity. He telegraphed this decision a long way by telling them to settle, by ordering the commissioner and Jeff Pash into his courtroom, and giving them the time this week for the decision to drop. They certainly had an opportunity to settle it right up until Thursday morning.
Now, when you listen to DeMaurice Smith, as we did yesterday, and heard him explaining the arbitration process and the fact that some people will argue, well, in the CBA, you gave this away, right? You gave away the judge and jury power to the commissioner. You should have expected this to happen. But he then started talking about, well, I think legal experts and lawyers will tell you an arbitrator, regardless if they have a bias, a previous bias, they still have to be fair. Does the league have something to stand on when they keep preaching, the CBA allows us to do this, the CBA allows us to do this, the CBA allows us to do this?
I think that they're half right in that argument, and that would be their best legal argument, that an outcome that's considered or at least kind of set out in the CBA is certainly allowable in arbitration, and the court should not, rather than rejecting it, should actually affirm it. The difference is that you don't get to give away every substantive right, and you don't get to mess the process up. And there are some fundamental issues of due process and fairness. Notice being one of them, and that was a key provision for Jeff Kepler to attack on behalf of Brady. The other being the ability to confront your witnesses and have a meaningful trial, and that's another place where the NFL seemingly erred along the way. And in the last case, was to some degree, what was the weight of evidence that should be accorded the Wells report? Because it's really inconclusive when you get down to it as to Tom Brady's role. So the NFL, in some ways, over-investigated and over-tried this case. I think that Roger Goodell probably could have upheld a suspension simply by having Tom Brady and asking him what happened, and saying he found him not credible, and he found him evasive even.
Yeah.
So a much quicker process could have been handled. But I think we as lawyers always say, a lot of times the police arrest a guilty person, but they get off because they mess up the procedure.
Yep.
And we win our cases because of procedure. And I think that's exactly what happened here. And because Judge Bermen rooted this so much in procedure, it's going to be very hard for the NFL to overturn this on appeal. And I think really given the timing of it right now, it's going to be it really takes it out of the 2015 season, and it may be into the 2016 season or even beyond before we see it. So I think the NFL will probably appeal with great ferocity, but I'm not sure what an appeal really fundamentally does to change the circumstance.
I'm talking to Robert Boland here, sports lawyer and professor at Ohio University. When you look at what the NFL is going to do in this appeal, what's the process going to be like now? Because does it go to someone else, or does it come right back to Richard Berman? I think that's what adds some confusion.
No, it jumps over Berman. The NFL has sort of given up. The NFL could go back to Berman and say, well, don't stay the vacation of this so we can appeal, but they've even said that that's so unlikely they don't want to be hit for another loss by Berman. They're going to go now and perfect their papers, and this is all done on paper. The record of the hearings with Berman, the record of Berman's decision is what they're going to appeal, and they're going to appeal it to the Second Circuit, which is in essentially the same building as Berman in Foley Square in New York, but they'll get a 3-judge panel sometime in the future to look at it, and the basic timing on an appeal, the median time on an appeal going up to the Second Circuit is about 10 months.
Oh, wow.
So we're really going to see that this projects out into the future. And if they could ask for an expedited appeal, they could ask for expedited review that might bring this back into this season. But I got to think that Jeff Kessler is a skilled enough lawyer to find every delaying tactic to get this season out of the way for Tom Brady.
Wow, it sounds like Tom will probably be retired, in a couple of years before this thing actually comes to a head.
You know this better than anybody. As an NFL running back, Tom's at an age where he measures his career in games, not seasons anymore.
Yeah, you're right.
So,
it just takes one bad injury, and all this is for naught here. Robert, I'm interested also when you think about, and I don't know if you've done this, when you think about the labor relations history with the league and the players, going all the way back to free agency when it first started and things of that nature, how it's always felt as if the players in the union were trying to climb uphill to find equality with the league and the owners. And it feels like now this was a major chink in the players' behalf. That they undercut the commissioner in a way that gives them some power. So it may not have an effect right now, but when the new CBA comes up, whenever that is in the future, what effect does this have on it?
Well, that's a really great question. I would almost tell you that if you think about great losses that ownership has typically had along the way before a new CBA, is they try very hard in the next collective bargaining round to close that loophole. And we could see a very ugly round of collective bargaining. Charlie Grantham, former head of the NBA Players Association, and I have talked together. He even said yesterday that he could see them saying we're going to lock the players out till we give the commissioner back this power in an unfettered sense. My sense is that actually the time for the NFL and the NFL Players Association right now is to strike while the iron's hot and try to use this to get some more neutral oversight of a collective bargaining agreement out there. One of the things that people don't think about very often, we think about free agency, we think about money, we think about our rights in a collective bargaining agreement, but who oversees the collective bargaining agreement? Who's looking over and being the referee in a collective bargaining agreement is a very important question. And that was one of the things the NFL won in the last round, to get rid of Judge Doty in oversight. And I think if the NFL can get some version of neutral oversight, or the NFLPA can get some neutral oversight back, and maybe Roger Goodell at this moment after this loss would be inclined to agree to some more neutral process that protects him and immunizes him, that would be a huge win. That would be almost as big a win as reopening the CBA and getting a wider free agency.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. Sports lawyer and professor at Ohio U, Robert Boland. Last question for you, Robert. When you look at the money that was spent here, the Ted Wells investigation, that was roughly $3 million. At least that's what we're guessing. Legal fees, maybe $20 million. Is this a colossal waste at the end of the day of money?
I'm enormously sad as a lawyer that I wasn't part of the Ted Wells report or receiving
exactly.
And I think you have to go back to some of the defense reports where coffee filters were $100,000 and toilet seats were $250,000 to find as much money that was as poorly spent to get such an inconclusive result. So I don't want to insult Ted Wells and Rogers and Paul Weiss-Rifkin's firm in their work. But I think the results were inconclusive, and the fact that the league took this to the mattresses is shocking. And I think I'd make this point, and it's worth at least saying, as somebody who loves football and also a lawyer, can you imagine what the league, with some of the other more pressing problems it's had, if it had this summer with its commissioner and its most bankable player, Tom Brady, working together on behalf of those problems, as opposed to locked in a court fight coming into Manhattan and into a federal court? What might have been accomplished with head injuries, youth football, maybe even issues about violence and position the game better. So I think the real cost of this, if you think about it, is obviously money that were resources that could have gone to other places. And then additionally, what could the league have accomplished, the opportunity cost of an offseason without controversy?
Yeah, no, I lied to you, Robert. One more question for you. We saw the preview or the trailer for the Concussion movie that Will Smith is starring in, about Dr. Wachu, who found CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and some of the battles that he had trying to get it public and out there and accounted for on behalf of the league. Is there going to be a legal recourse by the NFL, or is there going to be some sort of, I don't want to say movement, because I think there's been a lot of movement already, but some sort of issue happening when this movie comes out?
as somebody, you obviously played football a lot longer at a much higher level than I did, but this movie looks to be a very, very devastating blow to the league. Not because there are people that think football is healthy or safe, but because the transition issue for players is such a spot that both the union and management have some liability in. And I think to have fought over the deflated footballs at a time when this kind of movie's coming out is a real great tragedy. I don't think you can do anything legally about it, or would want to, simply because why would you want to call attention to any truthfulness of this? But I think what you want to do is you want to counteract it with more different news and to some degree change the narrative. And we're going to be talking about Deflategate for an awfully long time, and I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Robert Boland, I appreciate you joining us again here on Tiki and Tierney. Have a great Labor Day weekend. Be safe, and we'll talk to you soon.
As always, thank you.